I'm going to start broadcasting, and I'll share my screen. And really, where we start in this whole process is the NWR team has a set of plugins and a set of tools, two of which you really need, that are absolutely critical to your development. One is the NWR plugin here, and that's what's ultimately going to go in Blender. And the other one is the world runner. That's what you're going to use to test your world before you upload it online. So you can basically get pretty much everything except for maybe one or two features like the portals and things where you can actually see everything that the world can do. You can interact with it, but pretty much it's, you're the only one in there, so you're not really presenting or have access to that. But you need to download these two tools, and if you don't have them, there's a screen in the back of the platform over there. If you click that content panel, it'll bring up a browser window on your PC that you can actually download those two things. And they'll come down to, let's see, where are they? So they'll come down as zip files, right? One is the plugin, one is the world runner. Now the world runner, you just unzip completely, put it on your file system somewhere, and inside of it is an exe that you can run, that you're going to load glTF files, the scene files. The other one, important, you don't unzip it, you just leave it as a .NET zip file. So those are the two files you need to start this whole process. What we then do is we go into Blender. So presumably go to blender.org. You'll download Blender. It's a free program. And you'll start it up, right? And you see a panel that's, not unlike this. So a lot of 3D programs can kind of be overwhelming because there's so much going on. But really, there's a few basic parts of Blender that really I use for every project that I do. And we'll go through them in this whole process. One's called the Layout tab, and then you have UV editing, shading, and animation. And these two, I don't use for nowhere world creation, but these four tabs, and you may or may not have more tabs in your default setting when you download the program or not. You can actually, you can right click and delete it if you don't use it. And you can always add it back through this plus icon. But in Blender, you have the layout panel. This is your main scene, and these different windows, these different tabs open up different views that you can work in. Like UV editing, for example, has a screen on the right, which is your scene, and then usually there's a texture on the left that you're trying to UV edit an object to. Shading, which I spend a lot of time in, is where when we have an object and something in the scene, and of course this view is going to change when we get started. What will happen is at the bottom here, Blender uses this concept of node-driven development, right? So you use nodes to hook up things like textures and things and make them look different as you plug them in, and that's ultimately what gets rendered in this tool, and also when we export our world finally. And then lastly, animation. We'll touch on that briefly. There's one aspect of animation that I'll show you because it's relevant to how glTF works in regards to Blender. So this is kind of what that scene looks like, and we'll there's a lot of facets to this. The nonlinear animation, this animation panel is what's important. Nonlinear animation allows you to stack animations and things like that. But so we'll end up in this panel kind of towards the end. But over to the right, in most programs, you have an outliner, something that shows you how your scenes, the objects that make up the scene are organized. And then right below that, this is kind of one of the all-important panels, this thing down here. This is your properties panel. So pretty much everything that you tweak or you manipulate and set up are down here. And this is an important tab, the Render Properties tab. This is where we control how things get rendered, and we'll specifically be using baking later, so we can bake shadows and things like that. And then we have this important tab, the Scene Properties, that will be where you find all of the NWR plugin elements that you work with. And then a couple more here. Here, for example, I've got a light object, and you'll see properties about the light that we can manipulate, like its strength, its color, things like that. And ultimately, when we have an object that has material, you'll see material, other properties down here that we can manipulate. So that's the general layout of Blender. And so kind of we can officially kind of start this process. We can start building, and I'll show you by way of keystrokes. If you look down here in the bottom left, I've got a little screencast going on, so you can see when I click a button or touch a key or something like that. You'll at least get an idea of the tools or the keystrokes I'm using to manipulate things in this world. Generally speaking, it's pretty much G for grab, and then S for scale. And you may see Shift Z, because a lot of times when we're moving things around, I'll hit G for grab, but then I'll hit Shift Z to essentially lock the Z. I may be saying something you don't understand. Up at the top, the coordinate system in Blender is basically Z up, Y forward, and X goes horizontally. So when we place objects in Blender, most of the default objects are either facing plus or minus Z or Y. I apologize. Y forward. And when you want to keep things on a level plane, you don't want to manipulate the Z, so to speak. So that's why I'll hit Shift Z. So if I literally add a cube and I hit G and then Shift Z, you'll see that I'm moving it around, but it's not going up or down in the 3D plane. It's only going Y or X. So let me get rid of that. So that's kind of the keystrokes that are generally used, right, to move things around or get around in Blender. To start this thing off, though, we downloaded 2 files. One's the World Runner. That's the tool that you use to test your environment in. The other one is the plugin. And to get that into the system, you have to go Edit up here at the top, and then Preferences. And there's a section called Add-ons. And this is where you would hit Install. And you would literally go to your the place that you downloaded it to, that zip file, and you would click on the zip file entirely and install the add-on. So you don't have to unzip the plugin. You just install the zip file, and what you end up with is a file that looks, or a setting that looks very much like this, right? You'll see the plugin that you've installed, and you hit the check mark up here to essentially enable it. So presumably you've done that. Now you're ready to go, okay? And that's when these settings over here appear for you, the NWR project plugins and scenes and entities. And to cover these briefly, what these are, the player is you, right? So when you create a world, you need this entity that represents you as the player that's going to come into it. So when we start, we're going to create a player, and we're going to have a place for him to stand in the world. The other things that are in here real briefly are the teleporters. Those we'll cover a little later. The screen and content are things that you create and put in your world so that you can ultimately, when you upload it, have a way to present. Like this thing that you're looking at right now is a screen entity. In the content panels where I have all those images out that surround the platform, those are content entities. So they just provide you a way to, at runtime, when you've got it all uploaded, to dynamically put content in there like images and things. And then portals, those are a tool that NWR provides so that you can allow your users to go from one world to another world at runtime, so you can set those up. And a trigger is a special entity that allows you to put an object in the scene that ultimately is not rendered, but it allows your user, once they're running into the world, once they cross into it, kind of go into the space of the trigger, you can have actions fire that allow animations and things to occur. So I'm going to get started in terms of, let's create a scene. So in order to create a scene, you can obviously see we've got a gray, boring scene right now, right? And the way that that nowhere works at runtime is it's using a platform underneath, and underneath technology like Babylon JS, right? And it's a glTF. It's a glTF rendering platform under the covers. And in order for the worlds to be lit with light and things like that, you have to do one of two things. You have to either put a light in it. So I've got one light in it, but every scene that Babylon runs really requires an environmental setting. And that's where things like HDRIs come in. So I always say to people, the first step in creating your world is to go get an HDRI file that represents the color, the light, the scene setting that you want to depict. There's this place called Polyhaven HDRIs. These are all free. You can download them. They tend to be very large files. You'll see like 14 for one. And if I go to this one, 25 megabytes. These are huge files, but what's in these files in an HDR file, each and every pixel in this image is a 32-bit piece of data that has lighting information, of course the color, but it also carries lighting information. It's a lot of data that you don't want to use at runtime. In fact, you can't use it. It's just too much data for a browser to load at runtime and run efficiently. So what you do is you download this file, the HDRI file, and then you immediately take it to this tool, which is a Babylon JS tool. And again, these links are in one of those content panels at the back of the platform there you can go look at. You drag and drop your HDRI file here, and what comes out is I should probably show you this, is an environmental env file, right? So this is, you drag your HDRI in, which is the big file. Let's see if we can, here it is, the HDRI file. You can see this. This one's 20 megabytes. You drag that in, and this thing literally spits back out in your downloads in a env file. What it actually is under the covers, it's a cube map file, a 512 pixel cube map file. So there's 6 sides to the cube map. It's basically an efficient version of the HDRI file. And you ultimately will place this file, the environmental env, into wherever you're going to deploy your exported project to. So you notice the only file I have in my output right now, and I've kind of set this up ahead of time, is the environment env file. And that's to make sure that no matter what, when I load up a world, it has at least default lighting, the environmental lighting that will light all of our objects. The information in the HDRI and things like that we pull into Blender will actually allow us to cast shadows right from the light that's in the HDRI file. And what I mean by that is this, and we'll jump back into Blender. So in Blender, the shading tab has a few pieces here that you need to be aware of: object and world, right? So world is where by default you get this, there's nothing in the background. And to set this up, and this is where we get into nodes, we're going to add this special node called the environmental texture, right? And we kind of connect the dots in a way. That's how these nodes work. And I'm going to open up my HDRI file, and up at the top are these panels. These little dots, these little circles here, are the shading that goes on in these windows that you work in. So you'll see this one's for material preview, this one's for rendered preview. So generally I'll work in one of these two buttons to cast the scene, and then what you have to do is you go to this little drop down here, the viewport shading, and you turn on the scene world. And you'll see right off the bat what I have now is this my HDRI file is now lighting up my scene, right? And if I go to the rendering tab, same thing, but you're going to see a little different. This one's a little slower because it's actually doing a real-time rendering with ray tracing on the fly, whereas material really isn't. So this one's a lot faster to work in. So most of the time you're working in this, and then when you start getting into kind of the end game with it with shadows and things like that, you switch over to the render, and I'll show you how that works. But just because I know we're going to need it, I'm going to add 2 more nodes here. One is called the mapping node, and the other one, you notice that basically my screen has gone away, but we can quickly fix that um, by adding this texture coordinate node. Okay, and what this did is it allows us to, if we need to, rotate things, right? And we will, because I believe Polyhaven's HDRIs are generated more or less within X forward instead of Y forward degrees. So what I found is when I download the HDRIs, I pretty much have to go to 90 degrees. And now with Y forward, like this, you see up in the corner with Y forward, the sun is where it needs to be, because when I go to render this world out and export it from the NWR plugin, this is where the sun will be when I render it out. So right now, again, this is the important part: is Y is forward, Z is up, and X goes left to right. Okay. So, and this is the basic structure for how do you get your environment, your HDRI file, into your Blender environment so you can utilize it for lighting. The next thing we're going to do is essentially create the starting point. We need something to stand on when we create a world, right? So our player can come in and actually stand and not fall through the floor. And there's a couple ways to do that. You can add a mesh. You can add a plane. That's just a flat box. You can add a cube, which has some three-dimensionality to it. A lot of times what I do is I use a cylinder, and just you basically take it and you go into edit mode. So kind of for Blender basics, know that there's an object, know there's these modes to the layout window. So object and edit are where you spend most of your time. And then when you get into kind of more technical details, you may use texture paint and things like that. But edit mode shows you the object kind of in its raw face and vertice form. And what I'll do is I'll hit basically shift, and I want to isolate this top plane. And if I click and remove all the faces, now all I got is that one round plane. So a lot of the worlds I create, I like a round environment, because then you don't have any square edges off to the side that kind of, when you look out into the horizon, you see this kind of very pointy end point. So I like round environments. They kind of mask the fact that you're in this 3D round world. But instead of using this, I've actually kind of pre-created a little piece, and this is where we get into setting up the world as we want to create it. So I'm going to use this beach that I've created, right? And you can kind of see how it's made. It's just it looks like a frisbee in a way. It's got a little bit like a flying saucer in a way, but what I like about it is it kind of just gives a little depth to the platform that you're walking around on. And then it's using a texture. So if I go from world to object, you can kind of see, and this is generally speaking how most textures work in Blender. You have a principled shader, which means that you have like PBR. This is the surface details like emission and reflection and roughness and things like that. Almost all objects that you use in Blender, even for nowhere world creation and glTF, use a base image. That's typically your JPEG or PNG file that has the texture that you want to project, and a normal file. A normal file is a different type of data. In fact, it's not even color data, it's non-color data that helps lighting determine where shadows should be, where something should appear like it's got some 3D depth to it. And in combination, these two things, the normal and the base, are how most every object that you'll ever create using glTF are depicted, right? So I've got this world, and I always try to keep Y forward just so I know where I am. The next thing I need to do, bear with me, I'm over in the wrong thing. So here's my beach object. What I need to do is I need to put a person entity in it, or the player entity. This is what the player entity looks like, just from a Blender point of view. It's red. It's like a cone, and it points in the Y direction, right? So I'll typically move that back a little bit. And again, I'm going to hit grab and then Shift Z and kind of move it back a little bit so I can see where I am. Okay. And at this point, I'm almost there. I almost have a world that I can step into and test. But the one thing I'm missing right now is I have the beach. I have the object that represents what I want to look like I'm standing on, but I actually have to duplicate this. And I'm actually, while I do it, I'm going to title it Beach Collider. Spell it right. And then in the NWR tool, the thing that you need to be aware of is there's this notion of objects that are either colliders or they're objects that you really look at, right? So the collider is an object that doesn't need to be textured. It's going to be invisible anyway at runtime. So this is just to enable us to have a platform for which we don't fall through the floor, so to speak. So I have to label this a collider. And over at the top right, kind of back to Blender basics, you'll see some icons here. And these are just simply tools that allow you to determine whether you want to see the object in the viewport or not. And then this right one is very important, that in some situations you don't want certain objects to render shadows and things like that. So this is one, I don't really want to see it from a render point of view. And to be honest with you, the cone as well, even though the cone casts a shadow here, actually if I move to rendered view, you'll see, maybe not yet because I don't have a light going. It'll cast a shadow as well, but I don't want that really in the real world. So I'm going to turn that off for now too. So at this point, if I go to the Blender plugin and I determine an output directory, which is this, and I give it a name, the export glTF will light up. And this is kind of the first step that, and I see that error. Let me look at my object real fast. Sand ripples, yes. Sand ripples, there we go. And I'm going to pull up my world runner, and I'm going to load this scene. And let's hope I don't fall through the floor. That's the wrong file. I pulled up the wrong world. Open scene. I don't want to look at that one. I want to look at this one. Okay, so here we are. We have the sun back here to the right or the left. But I'm noticing a few things about this this layout that I don't really like. It's obviously the sand is a little too bright. It looks like it's reflecting a little bit too much. So this is where I can kind of go back in and fine tune how my beach should look. But what I know right now is that my light is probably the main cause of that. So I'm going to look at my light setting, which is this little icon right here. And I can see I got a strength going of 4, right? So I'm going to tune that down to about 2, and maybe even because it's sand and that my general environment's a little bit more sunny, maybe a little bit more warm. I'll color my sun just slightly yellow orange, and I'm going to go back in and export this again. Now if I look at it again, let's see if that helped at all. Okay, that's a little better, right? So I can now see my sand, and yeah, I get a little glimmer from the sunlight, almost like it's a little shine to it. But this is where your node development, how you tweak the look of things, what's shiny, what's rough. That's where you use this section. Okay. So we have our plane to stand on now, and this is kind of my favorite part. Now once we have the environment set up that I can at least stand around and walk, it's boring looking, right? So I need to do things that that give it a little life. I'm going to go back in here, turn my world in, and what I want to do is I can either create from scratch, a bunch of objects like cubes, planes, and things like that. But one of the nice things about working in a glTF workflow is you can actually import other glTF files. So I have a few that I like, some that I created, but some that I've kind of downloaded. There's a lot of places that you can go for some items like Sketchfab that are, free to use and things like that. But one that I like is this this palm tree, right? It's a very nice palm tree. It's got a couple pieces to it that are, like the bark and then the leaves and things like that. So when you manipulate these kind of objects, you kind of have to do something a little separate. You have to right click and do select hierarchy, right? So you can get all the objects at once. And if I want to, move it around, I can, you do that. If I want to duplicate it, scale it, I'm hitting the S key, scale it down a little bit. Maybe I want to rotate it with the R key. This is where you can really get really creative, and this is the fun part of creating your world. Just making things that that kind of is in your mind's eye, from a what do you want to have your world look like. I've got some other objects in here. Let me pull in my my signpost, and judging by where the size of this character is, this will be you. This needs to be a lot bigger, so I'm going to scale this up. And I'm going to take a quick look at his texture, and I see image 1. So some GLT objects have images and things baked into them. So if you have a texture that you want to use, and I do, I'm going to get rid of the default texture, and I'm going to open my own signpost texture and get rid of this, and I'm going to open a wood grained normal to this one, and it's the same look. Let's see what we have here. Okay, and what I like to do is kind of keep iterating, going back and forth. So I'll export this again. Okay, reload it to see where things are. So now things are starting to populate the world a little bit. This tree is a little too high, right? So I can go back and I can try to find him, and you can see him in Blender. Oh, actually, both of those trees are too high. So I'm going to go into find, and then do a grab and Z to bring him down through the plane a little bit so he doesn't stick through. And then let me do this one as well. Grab Z. Okay, and let's see, maybe I got 1 or 2 more objects, and I want to demonstrate this because this is one of the features of the plugin as well. Is if you go into import images as planes, if you have a transparent image that like grass is a good example, and that's why I brought one in here. Images as planes usually come in horizontal, like laid out on the floor, so you'll typically have to rotate this. It's usually on the x-axis, right? And then maybe move it around a little bit so you can kind of see where this is. And incidentally, I'm going to hit the number pad dot key. This is the quick way to get to any object in the scene and center him. So I'm going to move this one up a little bit. The thing that you need to do when you rotate things, you have to be careful not to continue too far without accepting that objects, or applying, I should say, the transform of that object, like scale and rotation. Because if you don't do that, when Blender, or when the World Runner, when the Babylon loads it at runtime, if it's not fixed in terms of its rotation, it'll go back to flat, right? And all of a sudden you won't see it, and it'll look awkward. So sometimes you have to be very cognizant of making sure that your transforms are applied. This one is an object I want to duplicate a lot. Let's make a few of these. Scale them, and for variety. And before I go too far, the thing I kind of forgot to do immediately is when you're dealing with things that you always want to face the user, and this is a nice feature of the NWR plugin. If I go to this plane and go into the plugin properties, one of the things down here is this concept called billboarding. And billboarding allows an object to face you at all times once you're in the world at runtime, right? So the thing I would kind of convey to you all from a learning perspective is when you pull in an image as its planes and you rotate it and you set its rotation, apply the transform, the object should always be facing Y forward. Okay, don't try to manipulate it and rotate it and things like that. The Babylon or the World Runner, they expect things to be in a specific direction so that when at runtime you're in there, that all the objects will face you at the same time. So I'm going to set this as vertical. Vertical is basically kind of it'll just spin around the z-axis, the up axis, so it'll always face forward to you, but it won't kind of look up at the sky, so to speak. That's what Omni is for, is when you want the thing to look at you from whatever direction the player is. So I'm going to switch this to vertical, and maybe what I want to do is I'm gonna duplicate, create a whole bunch of them. That you can create kind of things, all kinds of things at the same time by multi-selecting, and maybe one or two more. Grab. Okay. And now if I go back to render this out, let's try and export again. Okay. I know one thing that I've done wrong here is I've got a rotation that looks like it's maybe off center a little bit, and that's fixable by bringing something in. I probably moved it before I rotated it. So when it comes in and you import an image as planes, get it all centered at the origin. But that's why these are kind of, you can see them kind of moving in a way that they are still looking at me no matter which direction I turn. So that's my fault. If I had remembered to do that, I would fix it. But anyway, that's kind of how images as planes work. So that kind of is one element you can use to create more visual interest in your scene, right? So let me go back. Actually, it's bugging me too much. Let me get rid of one or two more. Set this guy back at the grab. Let's see. Let's object. Let's set his origin to be geometry to origin. And it looks like he's using the lower left part, so I may have to fix this up a little bit. That over, grab Z, basically, and then I'll make the origin, set the origin to the 3D cursor. Okay, now if I move this around, let's try this one more time. Duplicate object, grab. Duplicate, grab. Let's try this. That's a little better. It looks like they're sticking in place now. Okay. And then the last object for visual interest is I've got a couple palm trees that have some animation. The palm trees, let's see this one. Now what you'll notice is when you bring in an object that has animation and it's using bones, for example, it's very distracting to look at the bones. So up at the top right here in your panel, one of the things that you can select what you want to see is bones, right? So I don't want to see the bones. That's how you get rid of that, right? So then when I scale this up a little bit, I'm going to grab and maybe put that over here by the trees. Maybe duplicate it and grab that, and let me do one more. Duplicate, grab here. So you can really, it's up to you how either cluttered or busy you make your environment. The one thing that you would also maybe want to see over here is this notion of statistics. Statistics adds this little piece of information over here to you. The thing to know about nowhere worlds is generally speaking, for performance reasons, you want to keep the number of triangles and faces below 1 million, right? So we're nowhere near that right now, but the more you add, the more the scene gets busy with vertices and faces and things that have to be rendered at runtime. So on behalf of the users, right, you want to keep the system as performant as possible. So at this point, if I do one more export, I want to see where I am. Things are, things take a little longer once I keep adding things that have more data in them. Like there's a lot of animation data in these palms. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, so now I got these nice palms over here that are adding to the scene. This one looks like it's a little high, so I'd have to tweak him. But for right now, I actually think I'm just going to get rid of him for right now. Let's see if I can find him. Banana tree. Select hierarchy, delete hierarchy. Okay, and that way we have these two over here that we can concentrate on. And it kind of leads us to really the next topic, which is triggers and teleports. So the banana plants, right? One of the things you'll see over here is they got these squiggly lines, and that means they have animations attached to them. So if we drill into them a little bit, there's this notion of animation, and here's the animation keyframes, right? It also comes along with NLA tracks, and I'll go into this in a second and demonstrate something that's kind of a gotcha in a way. But for right now, I'm gonna rename this banana tree animation. Right? I'm going to do the same for this this other banana tree plant, banana tree animation. Right? And what you may notice is that when Blender automatically iterates an extension onto objects that are named the same, and that's just so that each object retains kind of a uniqueness about them. So now let's go into to some of the neat features that allow you to do some interaction in a nowhere world, right? That's with the teleporters and triggers. So a teleporter, if I add a teleporter, two objects appear. You've got a destination object, which is basically you, but it's going to be, if I grab this and let's say I want to be out somewhere else. I want to appear somewhere else if I go to the teleporter, go through the teleporter. The teleporter, let's see if I can, there we go, grab Z. Let's say I want my sign to be a clickable item that allows me to teleport somewhere, right? This teleporter is hooked up to this destination. You can rename these for clarity. In a lot of worlds, you may have multiple teleporters. So you want to say teleport from the sign, and then you have teleport by the banana tree or teleport dest. So long as you keep these straight, and keep the teleport destination set correctly in the teleport destination, you'll end up in the right place. So if I demonstrate this now, well, what happened is when I go up to the sign and I click it, I'll automatically be teleported over by the banana tree. So if I reload it, right, and as I walk up, now you'll see that in the world I can actually get the finger pointer, right? It's colliding with the trigger, and if I click it, I end up out by the banana tree. So that's a teleporter. These are really useful to allow you to get around the environment really quick. Okay, and then the last thing to show, kind of that's very important, is the trigger. Triggers. If I add a trigger, triggers are a cylinder by design here at front. So if I scale this up, essentially what triggers do is they're an element that allow you to, as the player, you walk into a zone. And when you walk into the zone, you can cause actions to happen. So if I'm going to say, if I'm in this area, and I'm going to scale this back so you can actually kind of see, if I walk into this area, this zone, right? What I want to happen is I want to trigger the animations that are on the palm tree that I know. Now triggers are ones that back up here to the right. I don't want a trigger to render in the scene. I don't want it to cast a shadow, and nor do I really need to see it after I set it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it first. And the steps that you get are here at the bottom in the properties when I click on a trigger. I can enter. On enter, I can cause an action to happen, and on leave, I cause an action to happen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a few steps, and I'm going to add the action that says, banana tree, I want to play. I want it to play in a loop. And when I leave, I want to basically have that banana tree animation stop. Okay, and I know I have two banana trees. I have to look at, there's banana tree animation 1 and 2. So I'm going to need to add another add step. I'm going to add an action, banana tree animation 1, and then I'm going to add a step on leave to tell the other banana tree, you also stop. Okay. Okay, now if I export this, and I want to do this real briefly to kind of show a gotcha. Let's see how long it takes to export. If I reload the scene, okay. If I run up to the sign, basically I'm well into the trigger area, right? But there's nothing happening with the animations going on with the palm trees. These things should kind of be swaying a little bit in the wind, so to speak. What I found is happening is if you go to the animation tab, you'll see that I have these two items. One has the keyframe animation and one has the nonlinear animation. Okay, what I found is there may be a conflict somewhere either in Blender or Babylon or whatever, but I found that if you get rid of one of them, basically the nonlinear animation, okay, and you just have the keyframed animations, if I re-export this, it may be something in the glTF file itself, but if I come back in, okay, and I'm in the animations, I'm not sure if you can see them. They're kind of subtle. You see the winds are kind of shaking these. It looks like I may have the wrong one for this one. Let's make sure I did this. The trigger. I may have the wrong one. Banana tree animation 1. Let's make sure that there's I saw a third one in here. I just may have it labeled wrong. Loop. And then let's see where he is. Okay, let's see if this works. I see one of them working, so I've got a conflict in one of these somewhere. Here. Banana tree animation 1. Anyway, I don't want to dwell too much on that, but it's workoutable. But one of the animations in there I've not got set up correctly. But anyway, that's what a trigger does, right? As you walk into a zone, it'll trigger the animation, and as I walk out of the zone, probably way over here, the animation will stop. Oh, I see he's working. Yeah, he's working now. Okay, so that's how triggers work. Triggers cause actions to occur, and actions are tied to animations. Now at this point, we're almost done. A few minutes left here, but what I wanted to show you is really kind of in my opinion, the thing that kind of sells the world when you enter it. And this is where we go into rendered mode, right? And what you're seeing here is kind of a couple things that are superimposed on each other, the beach and the collider. I don't need to see the collider, right? The collider is something that's going to be transparent anyway. But where are my shadows? Okay, let's try this. Oh, that's why. Right. So I didn't have my my rendering scene world and scene lighting on. This is why that HDRI is very important. This is what allows it to cast the shadow, right? And you can kind of see that it's rendering a square for this teleport. Obviously, the teleports should not be rendered. The teleports I should turn off from a rendering point of view, and I don't even need to see them. Okay, so now what's left down here is the shadows to go with just the objects that are in the scene. One of the things I see right here is that I'm getting more or less a, that looks like the right shadow to me. I thought it was different. But you can see the outline of the trees here and the palm trees. And these are the items that I personally, I think these are what make a scene. But in order to get them to render correctly in Babylon, you have to do really what's called light map baking and baking a texture or a shadow map. And because this is a very large area that we need to cover from a shadow perspective, there could be items all the way out here. You're going to need an object that represents this or holds this. And the way that I do it, and I'm not sure if this is the perfect way to do it, but it certainly works, is we take an object like the platform we're standing on. I'm going to organize myself a little better over here. And that's the beach itself. So if I click on the beach and I right click and duplicate it, I'm going to grab it, and now I've got this beach, a secondary beach. And I'm going to call this beach shadows. Okay. And I'm also going to raise it above the real beach by just a minuscule amount. I want it to, because ultimately what the goal with this is it's going to hold information that only pertains to the shadows that are being cast in this rendered mode. So in my beach shadows, because this is a duplicate, I need to get rid of the beach texture that's on it. I need to create a new material. I'm going to call this beach shadows. Okay. And if I go into my shading tab, you'll see I have pretty much a blank slate here. I have something that has no textures or anything with it yet. And in order to add a texture, a new texture that doesn't exist, I create an image texture, not the environment that we used before for the HDRI, but an image texture. Okay. I'm going to create two of these, and I'll show you why in a second. So I'll create another image texture. Okay. And ultimately, one will be what I hook up after I finished what I'm going to do. And the other one is in Blender. When you go to bake something, when you go with bake lighting, one of the ways that you do that is you select the node, the texture that you're wanting to bake to. And then that's what Blender knows. Okay, I got to bake to this texture. So because this is a large area, and these bones are distracting me. I don't know why these keep appearing over here to the left, but I'm going to create a new texture. And this texture is going to be beach shadows. I want it to be a 2K, basically 2K image. It's white, right? So all that will appear on here is dark shadows against a white background. It needs to have an alpha because we're going to have to manipulate that here in a second. And when I have that set up and I have this selected, and I have the beach itself selected, rather the beach shadows selected. Make sure I've got the beach shadows selected. When I click this, the next important thing to know about is in the render tab over here at the right, there's this option called bake. And if it pretty much it's set up fine to begin with, but essentially really all you have to do is make sure that you've clicked this particular node and then you hit bake. And what will happen over here is once I go to beach shadows, this bar is not showing you what I see, but let's give it a second. What should end up being presented here on Beach Shadows is a white background, like a white circle with the shadows of the objects that I'm casting shadows from. Bear with me while it just goes through the process here a little bit. You can see texture bake. And this part can sometimes take a while based on the size of the image that you're trying to write to. And he's just chugging away for some reason, just slow as he can be. I don't want to interrupt him too much while he's doing this because that could mess up the render, but let's let him complete. Is there anything else I can get rid of over here from a rendering point of view? This all looks good. Okay, he's almost there. The last thing I was really going to present to you, and we can still do this, and I'm not sure if we're limited on time or not, but adding the screen and content entities is literally as simple as just clicking the button screen and content, and they'll show up in the environment like any other object, and you can place them. Those are really what you want to, it did complete finally, but and there's not too much really to see here other than this. But actually, before I go into screen content, let me just finish my train of thought here with the shadow maps. So if I'm going to save a copy of this image, and I'm going to call it Beach Shadows, and I'm going to put it into the input. And I go into a program called GIMP, which is much like Adobe Photoshop, and I'm going to open this up. I'm going to open the image that I just created. Okay, and there's not much to look at here, and that's kind of on purpose. All I want to know really is about these dark shadows right here. And I can see in my island, which tapers off at the sides, has a little bit of darkness to it too. But the process I use is basically to turn this into a grayscale image, right? So we get rid of all the color to it. And then in GIMP, there's this nice feature, and Photoshop probably has it too, called color to alpha. And this is where we can actually get rid of all the white, okay? And then you'll see what's left over is transparency with the shadows only, okay? And then what you can do in colors is you can adjust the alpha so that, you know, the shadows and everything is as dark as you need them to be, right? So you don't want them too dark, but you want them maybe a little darker than they render out. So I'm gonna go with that, and I'm gonna save this back out. And finally, now I can use this node to hook up the color and the alpha. I'm going to open up the beach shadows, which is now a much smaller image. Okay, let's see what you're doing. Oh, I know what's going on. Basically, in the materials tab, back over here in the properties, the material properties, this image, this material rather, is a transparent image. And to deal with that, you have to go into your displays, right? See how blend mode is opaque here? We would need that to actually be alpha blend, right? Alpha blend says, treat this texture as a transparent object that blends with its background or whatever is underneath of it. So there's really no shadow mode because I don't want this object to cast its own shadow. It's already a shadow. So as soon as I have this, and let's go back out and export it. Again, the bigger the worlds are, the little longer time it takes to export the objects. Now, if I go in here, you'll see right now, right? I don't have any. There's no shadows or anything. So now when I go to reload this world, right now I've got shadows. Now I've got some depth to the scene. they're a little dark, but we can go back and tweak that. But now everything has a little bit more depth to it, right? And that to me is the purpose of it. You want to create a world that has a little life to it, that looks like something the user would kind of recognize. And when things don't have shadows, you kind of have this feeling like you're not really in the place, right? It's not really real. And sometimes that's by design, but when you're kind of creating some worlds that have something that's familiar, shadows to me bring life to everything, right? And then to really finish off, like I was mentioning before, if we go back into layout mode, in order to create actual interactivity or something you want to present to the people that you want to visit to your world, this is where you would go back and maybe add a screen entity, right? And grab that and put that off, raise it up where people can see it, and content entities. Again, these are objects where at runtime, people who may use your world or maybe even yourself, these are where you're going to post images or things like, NFT images and galleries and things like that. So you can have a ton of these sprinkled all around the system. And that's what really people come in, this is what you want them to see, is the images and things, and click on things so they can interact and navigate around the world. So that's really, I know we're kind of over time with this 4 o'clock, but let me stop where I am. I'm going to stop presenting. And I'm gonna jump back into the world. And see if you guys have any questions.
I'll amplify so y'all can hear me. So when you import a glTF object into a scene, it already comes pre-populated with its own animation, its own colliders that are rendered in the system, or do you have to set those up manually?
It depends, because like the signpost, for example, has no animations. But glTF files really come in 2 flavors. They come in with the .glTF extension. I'll go back into GodMike. The glTFs come in a couple forms. glTF, which is where the textures are separate from the data itself, and they come in a form of a GLB, which is a GLB binary, a glTF binary. That's where you have one big packed glTF file with the images embedded. So it can come in one of those 2 flavors. Now, not all glTFs have animation data, right? The signpost in this scene did not have animation data. So some will be a little bit heavier or different than others. But the animations, what I'm finding is that many of the objects I get off of Sketchfab or whatever that have animations, they actually have both the animation keyframe data and the nonlinear animation track. And that can be a problem, right? I think it may be a problem for the Blender plugin or the Babylon world. I'm not sure which, because if it sees both of them, I think it gets confused. So you have to get rid of one. And what's the nuance about using the NLA track, the nonlinear animation, is whatever the title of the track is, you may not have noticed that because I kind of sped through it, is if the name of the track does not match the name of the NLA data that's in the yellow part, it won't play. They have to match exactly, and they don't always match when you get the file, right? So you have to tweak that. That's why I just get rid of the NLA data completely if I can, and just rename the animation whatever I want, like, banana tree animation, something simple. And that way, so long as you name all the objects that have that same type of animation the same, what you'll notice, they start stacking suffixes like 001, 002. And you have to, in the trigger, you have to basically set each one to play uniquely, and then stop each one as you go. So, got it?
Yeah, thank you, Rod.